Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Meños podcast, episode 8. Last podcast, I had said episode 6. I got it wrong. It was actually episode 7, but this one is 8. And I'm going to be talking about Iran. But before we get to that, let me shout out our sponsor for today. Our sponsor for today is Pueblo Site Services. They are a provider of chain link fence and porta potties in the Inland Empire. Whenever my friends have a party or an event, anything, it could be a party, funeral, divorce party, anything along those lines, I always let them know. Pueblo Site Services will get you straight. Also for fence, and in regards to fence, gates, windscreen, anything along those lines, they do good work. The customer service is impeccable, and all around good people. You should check them out at Pueblo Site Services on Instagram, and you can send them a text. You'll find their number on the Instagram page. For those of you that don't know, that's my business. So please support the business. Please. It would mean a lot. All right. So, Iran. Also, just off topic, I was going to do this last week, but got in a car accident. So, been dealing with the insurance. Fuck insurance. Any of you have ever dealt with insurance, you realize it's like the shadiest fucking industry in the country. It's disgusting. It's up there with like fucking the military industrial complex. Like, it's the only industry where they get their profit from not doing what people pay them for. You know what I mean? So I'm paying a monthly premium, and then when it comes time to use them, they do everything in their power to like not pay you. So, yeah, it's kind of annoying. Been dealing with that. Looking good, though. I think I'm going to make things work. Shout out my brother. He's been a big help with that. Okay, going on. So, Iran. I've been seeing on the news a lot that, I feel it's Israel stoking it mostly. They're like, we need to eliminate Iran. Netanyahu just spoke to the United Nations last week or this week, and like, a lot of the countries just walked out during a speech. They're like, yeah, fuck this guy. This guy has no right to lecture us about, decency and dangers in the world when they're literally a rogue fucking nation. They are conducting a genocide. I didn't label it a genocide for the longest, but at the very least, it's ethnic cleansing. But, hey, these numbers don't lie. There's like over 30,000 civilians killed. That's crazy. That's insane. And if you really think about it, like, why are we involved there? It has nothing to do with us. Like, I don't know. You could go down the rabbit hole, like saying that, there's some blackmail operation, that all our elected politicians are compromised. And that is valid. If you really think about it, I wouldn't put that past intelligence agencies. They're 100% capable of that. Even the Shah of Iran, it's a good headway into what we're going to be talking about. He talked about how the Jewish lobby in the United States was very powerful and very influential, and they had a lot of money. And that was in the 70s. So 50 years later, there is no doubt in my mind they've consolidated power in the United States in regards to the political class. And you have people, like if you were to say the Jews control the media, like people would look at you like, oh my God, you're anti-Semitic. You love Hitler. No, like the heads of like all these big media companies do happen to be Jewish. I'm not saying it's like every Jewish person is evil, but I mean, there's the evidence of them having a huge influence in media. I'm like, it's evident. And then you have Larry Ellison. He's the CEO of Oracle. If you've ever clocked in to the machines and clocked out, I know FedEx used Oracle machines when I used to work there to clock in and out. That's Larry Ellison's company, and he's a billionaire. I believe he's like top 10 richest people in the world, and he's in talks of buying TikTok. And He is the biggest what's it called, donor to the IDF, the biggest private donor to the IDF. If you don't know, that's the Israeli Defense Forces. It's their military. So you're talking about an American billionaire donating millions on millions of dollars to a foreign military, and then now he's pursuing to purchase TikTok, and all that is to control the narrative in this country, in my opinion. And just to bring it back to the Shah, because I am going to be talking about Iran. It's fucking crazy that 50 years ago people were talking about this. You have interviews of Richard Nixon in the 80s talking about how the Jewish lobby, specifically AIPAC, have a tremendous amount of influence in the country. And I feel like for the longest time, if you were to bring some shit like that up, you would be labeled an anti-Semitic person. And it's not the case, I'm not saying like Jewish people are evil, like far from it. And I'm not saying all Israelis are evil. My gripe is with the Israeli government, particularly the Likud party, Benjamin Netanyahu's political party. So for those of you listening, think about it like the Republican and Democrats here that we have. In Israel, they have warring political parties as well. I don't think theirs is a two-party system, though. I believe they have a little more diversity in that sense. But the Likud party in particular, they're the right-wing party, so I would label them like the MAGA of Israel. And Bibi Netanyahu, he's the prime minister, and he's been the longest-serving prime minister. So his goal, he's like made no secret about it, is to drag us into war with Iran. He was a supporter of the Iraq war. Like, he literally spoke to Congress in 2002 talking about how this war is necessary, things along those lines. He was pushing for the Iraq war, and that was just a catastrophe for us. We spent in Iraq and Afghanistan together, we spent $8 trillion. Think about the opportunity cost. How many schools we could have built with that? How many hospitals? How many roads? How much debt? How much investment we could have given to small businesses? Like, all these things we could have done with that $8 trillion. How much houses we could have built? Like, all this opportunity cost just because we wanted to fund wars in the Middle East. Yeah. Fucking frustrating. So, in the foreseeable future, I do see our government and Israel's government trying to push us into war with Iran. And that's scary because they are a formidable opponent. They're a lot bigger than Iraq and Syria. And they've had time to see how we maneuver during a war. And we're underestimating them, in my opinion. And I don't really want to fight a war with Iran because that's just going to cost a lot of money. And more importantly, people are going to die. Like, I have homies in the Army and the Marines and the Navy and stuff. Like, I don't want them to be in danger. And I'm sure they don't want to die over some bullshit either, But, I mean, I just hope it doesn't come to that. But it is looking like that's the path we're going to. I remember in the 90s, a professor told me, well, I was born in the 90s, but I was a kid. But my professor was talking about this general in the 90s, or like early 2000s, like before 9/11 or right after 9/11. And I believe the neocons in the Department of Defense and the government were talking about taking out 5 governments. I'm going to look that up, actually. 7 countries. Let me see. Sorry. Yeah, it was General Wesley Clark that talked about how the people in the Department of Defense were talking about taking out 7 countries, starting with Iraq. Then it would be Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and then finally at the end, Iran. It's fucking terrifying because every single one of those countries has been destabilized. Bashar al-Assad was just ousted of power this year. Lebanon is at war with Israel right now. Libya got toppled in 2012. Gaddafi got a knife shoved up his ass. Sudan is having its own conflict. Somalia is just a shit show. So yeah, it's I really believe that what he was talking about, that we've been planning this for a long time. And if they already got 6 out of 7, why are they going to stop? It's obvious they're going to go for Iran. And the reason I'm doing this pod is like a lot of people, and rightfully so, they have their own lives. They don't really look into this shit, and they'll just see the news or they'll see TikTok and they'll be like, oh yeah, they want to kill us. They hate us. Iran hates us. And I'm like, no, they don't. Just like the people here don't really hate Iran that much. It's just the narrative our government's pushing to our people to stoke the flames for a war with Iran. And the reason the government does hate our government in particular is we fucked them over. We had a coup in their country in 1953. So they had a democratically elected individual named Mohammad Mossadegh. And he was the prime minister of Iran. And he was against imperialism and foreign powers meddling in Iran, particularly the British. He hated the fucking British. He fucking despised them. If he had like a gun with 2 bullets and he had the British, Hitler and Stalin, he would shoot the British twice. Like, that's how much he hated the British. And the Americans weren't any better. Well, they were also wary of Americans, but it wasn't as hateful as it was with the Brits, and rightfully so. So the Brits controlled the oil in Iran, the vast majority of oil. I'm going to go through this thing. So let's start from the beginning. So Iran right now is controlled by an Islamic government, but it wasn't the case. Before that, in 1979, when the Islamic Revolution happened, the country was ran by the Shah of Iran. The Shah is like the king. Think about like a king, how like the King of England or the King of Denmark or something along those lines. The Shah was the man in charge in Iran. And he had a dad before. So the one that got overthrown, they both got overthrown, but Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, he's the one that got overthrown in 1979. And his dad, Reza Shah, was the one who took power in the country. He started his own dynasty and named himself Shah. His dad was a badass. He was like a Cossack warrior. He was all around man's man. And that's how he was able to secure power in Iran. And his son was more like a smart, pretty boy, like a little more docile. Wasn't lionized like his dad. But the Allies overthrew the dad in the 1940s during World War II because he was really friendly with the Nazis, and the Allies were like, "Oh no, hard pass on that. Yeah, you got to get out of here, brother." And then they put his son in charge, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and like I said, he was eventually kicked out in 1979. And what's crazy? When they kicked his dad out and they put him in charge, he was only 21. So he was 21 in charge of the whole country, really, and during World War II. So talk about getting thrown into the fire at a young age. And he wasn't really respected that much by the population because he was a rich kid. He grew up rich. His dad was a warrior, but he grew up rich. He got sent to Europe for school, so he was very cosmopolitan in that sense. He spoke multiple languages. He was very open-minded, very westernized, and the vast majority of people in the country were more traditional Islamic people. So naturally, you could see where the rift would begin. They were just different, him and his subjects. The Iranian people, like I said, they did despise the British, but yeah, like they kind of deserved it because they would meddle in the country, and then on top of that, they were exporting the oil. So the company that was the main culprit for this is AIOC, Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. So that oil company, I'll give you some facts. It's actually British Petroleum, but that was the name they had there, AIOC. And if you don't know, British Petroleum is Arco. If you're here in the United States, they brand British Petroleum brand itself in different names in whatever market they're at, and here in the United States, it just happens to be Arco. They call it Arco. But if you look at the signs, like a lot of it will be like a green little diamond, and that it will say BP there. So yeah, BP owned Arco. I think they just sold it, but it did used to own Arco. Yeah, I remember hearing that in college. But I think in the 2020, well, like recently in this decade, they sold it. But I'd have to check it out. And the reason why the Brits were so involved with AIOC is the British government was the majority shareholder of the company. What that means is they owned 51% of the stocks for the company. So that's the government having a hand in private business. Talk about, capitalism. That's not fucking capitalism. Just when it's convenient for them, they'll be like, oh yeah, we're a capitalist country. I'm like, nah, that's like a very fascist socialist thing to do. But I digress. So in other words, the company was basically nationalized by the government, and it did pretty good for itself. From 1945 to 1950, AIOC reported 250 million in profit, and in today's dollars, that's around $5 billion in 5 years. So $1 billion a year in profit, that's not bad. I'll take that. That's pretty good. And the Iranian government, on the other hand, in that same time period, only received 90 billion. In today's dollars, that's 1.6 billion. So you're talking about the country who has the oil. It's their oil. The British are exporting it and pulling it out, and they're getting the lion's share of the profits. And when the people find out about this, of course they're gonna be pissed. They're gonna be like, "What the fuck? Like we're getting fucked over this bad on the deal, and then on top of that, we're not even getting a cut. Like the average person is not getting a cut. That's just getting consolidated to the people in government and the rich people. It stays up there. That money doesn't trickle down. They're like, dang, only 15 million profit this year. I guess I won't buy my second yacht." And then the people don't even know when their next meal is. I'm like, come on. How do you expect a revolution not to happen? A little side note, that might end up happening in this country, if I'm being honest. The people my generation can't afford a fucking house. Jesus Christ. Apartment rent is $2,300 for a single bedroom in a good area. That's fucking insane. How are we supposed to live like this? I remember talking to my dad, and he was saying that when he got here, or when the year I was born, and they were living in some apartment in San Bernardino. It was a 2-bedroom apartment. I don't know how many bathrooms. I'm sure 1 or 2, but 2-bedroom apartment for $300 in San Bernardino. If you adjust it to inflation, it'd probably be like I go off the minimum wage. So depending what the minimum wage is at the time, that's what I go off of. But yeah, we did the math. I forget the exact number, but yeah, it's like way more expensive right now. Everything is so much more expensive, and like we can't afford a house, and these businesses and corporations are just getting richer and richer. Elon Musk is worth half a trillion. He's worth $489 billion right now. Just in 2021, he was only worth 200 billion. So you're talking about in the span of 3 years, his net worth has doubled, more than doubled. And every billionaire, the same thing. They've just gotten richer and richer. And the average American is drowning in credit card debt. They can't afford rent. They're just, it's a hopeless feeling. I'm like, all right, like, if you keep pushing poor people long enough, what happened in Iran is going to happen here. A revolution is bound to happen. And I don't want that. Like that, like, we can compromise, because people die in revolutions. It gets violent. It's not good. And then our foreign enemies are going to come at us like vultures. You know, they're going to be stoking the flames. They're going to be funding one side. You know, Russia will be funding the conservatives. Then, you know, China will be funding the liberals. And then while we're fighting each other, we sell off our country because we want to get an advantage over the other side. Next thing you know, this country doesn't exist, and we're just client states for Russia and China. That's a real possibility, and I don't want that to happen. So in order to avoid that, rich people need to stop being so fucking selfish. In particular, the corporations. And the government needs to stop being such a bitch and stop selling us out. Yeah, little off topic, but that's what happened in Iran. The people were fed up. Like, we're getting fucked over by the Brits, and then on top of that, we're not getting a piece of the pie. Come on, that's not right. So, like I said, they were getting stiffed over by the British government, and the people applied pressure to the government. So then the government began to apply pressure to the Shah to negotiate better royalties from AIOC. And I mean, it is kind of difficult to set up a whole oil extraction operation. So I could kind of see where the oil companies were coming from. But the fact is, like, you're making billions in profit. What's a little more money to your host nation? Is that worth tarnishing the whole relationship? I don't think so. And apparently, later down the line, they did want to play ball. And the reason for that was also the United States. We became the world power after World War II. So the Brits didn't have the juice like that anymore. And they were kind of bullying Iran. And Iran was, they were getting fed up. And you know who's right next to Iran? The Soviet Union, China, and the U.S. kind of had to, like, the stick, just smack the shit out of the Brits. Like, hey, yo, like, you're not the big dog anymore. We are. And you're going to fuck things up for us because you're going to piss them off, and then they're going to go running to the Soviets. And that's a huge oil producer that we're going to lose because you want to be a bully. So the U.S. began to mediate things between Iran and the Brits. And Mossadegh wouldn't budge. Old Mossy, as they would call him. They would literally negotiate with him. Mossadegh was an interesting character, actually. I'll get into him right now. But, yeah, the U.S. was... It's not like they really cared about Iran like that, but they couldn't have Iran being buddy-buddy with the Soviets. So they were strictly thinking in that regard, like, hey, we can't have them on the side of the Soviet Union because that would be bad. Like, Korea was happening at the time, so the U.S. needed a lot of oil too because they're fighting a war. So they're like, okay, we need as much oil as we can get, and if we lose this potential oil producer because you guys can't come to an agreement, that's gonna fuck things up for us. So we're not having that. And the Brits were like, all right, we'll negotiate with the Iranians. Yeah. And another big reason for that happening was the the Brits heard about the United States and the Saudis coming up with a 50-50 deal. A 50-50 deal compared to like an 80-20 deal. Uh, yeah. Like, of course, they're going to be like, oh, okay, we'll play ball now. And, yeah, it did work out for the Saudis. Because for 50 years, I think that contract was for 50 years. We went 50-50 with the Saudis, which is why we protect the Saudis so much. A lot of people were wondering, like, whoa, why do we care about the Middle East so much? It's oil, of course. Like, we have money in the region, a lot of money. And on top of that, oil is a national security thing. Our boats, all our warehouses, everything regarding energy is fueled off oil in this country, the vast majority of it. And in my opinion, if I put on my tinfoil cap, I feel like that's why there's been such a push to green energy. It isn't really about the environment. It's just we don't want to be so reliant on oil, and that means a foreign entity has a certain amount of influence over you, because if we get our energy from you, you can kind of control us. So the more we get off that energy, the less controlled we are by a foreign government. And I think that's why they've been pushing a lot of the green thing. That's one avenue. I'm not saying it's the only reason that they're doing that, but it makes sense. Then on top of that, it's like a startup, like all this solar shit, all the wind shit. So like, think about being an investor in that, or a owner of these companies, and that's like a new avenue. Like, you're gonna be very rich. So I feel like that's another one. You just have to like always just follow the money. Like, whenever I hear shit like people like in the news or like the government, like, oh, it's for the world, like climate change, I'm like, I want to believe you, but I'm like, I would feel like, where's the money? Like, there has to be some profit motive here. It isn't just, oh, for the world a better place. Bullshit. A lot, like, maybe there's some true believers, but it all goes down to money, in my opinion. Same thing with this thing happening in Iran. It all goes down to money. The Brits and the Iranians were fighting over money, and Mohammed Mossadegh was the man who spearheaded the effort to nationalize the oil. And they did this in the 50s, 15 years after. Yeah, like 15 years after Lázaro Cárdenas nationalized the oil in Mexico, which was also a British company. So the Brits lost their oil holdings in Mexico, and then in the 50s, they got kicked out of Iran. And that one pissed off the British because they had a huge oil operation compared to the one in Mexico and Iran. And then on top of that, it was the British Empire falling apart after World War II. You know, they lost India. They lost a lot of their colonies. They lost AIOC, the oil company. So, yeah, it was just their downfall. And then the Suez Canal. So that's what one of the British government officials was worried about in regards to like compromising with the Iranians, because he's like, hey, this is a bad precedent. If we compromise with them, then everyone's going to get the bad idea and think they could negotiate with us, and then that's going to be bad for us. And he was right, because after Iran nationalized the oil, 3 years later, the Egyptians nationalized the Suez Canal. So if you don't know, the Suez Canal connects the Mediterranean to, I believe, what sea is that? It's the sea between Egypt and Saudi. And that gives you access to the ocean that connects the rest of the world. So before the Suez Canal was created, Europeans had to sail through Africa, down the coast of Africa, and go around it before the Suez Canal was created. And if you've never seen a map of the world, Africa is fucking huge. So think about how much time you save taking your boat through the Suez Canal. And that did happen in the 50s. So I guess they were right. But hey, what can you do? You can only be top dog for so long. And Mohammed Mossadegh, just to go back to that guy, he was also educated in Europe. He was a cosmopolitan as well. And he hated the British as well, because the British treated Iran like it was conquered territory. And he was actually so educated, he was a lawyer in Switzerland and France. And to the point where he had a village of 150 people to his name. So he was a rich guy. He was an aristocrat, but he wanted to fight the imperialists. And eventually he did. He was able to nationalize the oil, and this angered the Brits. And the Brits put an embargo on Iran, so Iran couldn't sell that oil. But guess who doesn't give a fuck about the West embargo? The Soviet Union, you know. So that's when the Brits were like, okay, you know what? Or the Americans were like, you know what? We need to take care of this guy, Mossadegh. So this is the big reason why Iran hates us. We launched a coup, meaning we manipulated their public with radio stations, and we pumped a bunch of money to the opposition forces in the country, and they kicked Mohammed Mossadegh out of the country, and then the Shah was brought back into power. So the Shah, the young Shah that I told you, he was 21 when he took power, he was kicked out by Mossadegh and his people because they saw him as a bitch. He was selling out the country to the Brits, and that wasn't good. So Mossadegh took the reins, and then eventually he was not playing ball with the West, and they were like, yeah, this guy's no good. He has to go. So we deposed him. We brought back the Shah. And from 53 until 1979, so what's that, 26 years, the Shah was in power in Iran until he was kicked out by the Islamic Revolution. And then he eventually died in Egypt. But the Shah was our friend. He was a monarch. He used secret police. He was corrupt. He was just not a great person. You have the Patrick Bet-Davids of the world who fucking like to glaze him because I feel like he has a resentment towards Iran, the Islamic people in Iran, because he's a Christian from Iran. And, you know, his family got ran out of Iran. So I feel like that's why he has a gripe with the government, and rightfully so. But, yeah, that's one reason why the Iran hates us. You know, we put the Shah in power, and the Shah not only sold oil to us and our allies, but se hacía pendejo with the Israel thing. He wouldn't press the issue with the Israel thing. Like how I mentioned earlier, he was getting interviewed by 60 Minutes, and he was just like, yeah, the Jewish people have a lot of influence in America because they have a lot of money, and they're able to influence politicians. And that was him saying that. And he wasn't a friend of Israel, but, you know, he kind of tolerated it because he wanted to be on the good graces of the United States. And, yeah, it's crazy. He also bought our military weapons. And that's why we loved him, because he bought our weapons. He gave us the billions of dollars in business with us, so of course we're going to like him. And then on top of that, he was very pro-West, meaning there would be like nightclubs in Iran. Women would be out in restaurants or bars with like dresses like if it was America. They had like ski resorts. You had people like Frank Sinatra going. Like it was very westernized. And the vast majority of people were not like that. They were very much conservative and, you know, more aligned with the old school. They weren't raised and educated in Europe like the Shah was. So naturally people started disliking him. And then on top of that, things weren't better financially for the people as well. There was fucking a lot of poverty, a lot of wealth disparity. You know, the rich were just getting richer, the poor were getting poorer, and the people were fed up with it. So eventually, they had a revolution, and when the Islamic government took power, they hated us. They hated America because of all the meddling we did in their country those past decades. So since the 40s, we've been meddling in their business. So no, how many decades? Yes, like 50 years. You're talking about 50 years we were meddling. No, 30 years. Yeah, 30 years. For 30 years we were meddling in their country's fucking business. And yeah, they are valid in the reasons that they dislike us. But I don't think this relationship is too far gone. In my opinion, I think we have a lot of common ground. I'd be watching vlogs of people that travel, and I like to think that's like genuine talks that people have. They don't say a lot of bad things about America. I have no problem with the Iranians. The Iranian government is different, just like Israel. I have no problem with Jewish people, but the Israeli government, yeah, I do have a gripe with them. Same thing with Iran. With that being said, guys, keep that in mind. All this information when you see Iran in the news, because powers that be are gonna try to drag us into war. Don't fall for that shit. Have a good day, guys.